When a black man was handcuffed and dragged off a plane, passengers assumed the worst. But one powerful sentence changed everything, leaving everyone speechless. Stay tuned to see how this story unfolds. And let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The luxurious first-class cabin of Skylux Airlines was buzzing with activity. Passengers were settling into wide, cream-colored leather seats while flight attendants served welcome drinks. The cabin smelled of freshly brewed coffee and citrus-infused water, and a light murmur of conversation filled the air. Jordan Michaels, a sharply dressed black man in his early 40s, quietly slipped into his seat. 3A. His tailored suit and polished briefcase spoke of success, but his demeanor was relaxed as he powered up his tablet. This trip was a routine one for Jordan, a corporate lawyer with a string of landmark cases to his name. As Jordan reviewed his notes for an upcoming presentation, a man across the aisle shot him a sideways glance. The man, middle-aged with a button-down shirt stretched across his stomach, leaned toward a flight attendant and whispered something. The attendant frowned slightly but approached Jordan nonetheless. Jordan looked up, sensing the tension. What was being said? And why was he being singled out? The flight attendant cleared her throat. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass? Please." Jordan raised an eyebrow but nodded politely. "Of course," he said, handing over his ticket. She glanced at it and smiled apologetically. "Everything looks fine. Thank you," she said, returning the pass and walking back toward the galley. The man across the aisle, however, wasn't satisfied. "Are you sure?" he said loudly enough for others to hear. "People sneak into first class all the time. He probably just walked in here without a ticket." Jordan looked at him calmly. "Is there a problem?" The man crossed his arms. "I'm just saying, people should sit where they're supposed to. First class isn't for everyone." A murmur spread through the cabin as other passengers began to take notice. One flight attendant returned, her expression now tense. Before she could intervene, the man turned to her again. "You should call someone to check. I don't think he belongs here." Moments later, a uniformed police officer boarded the plane. His presence sent a ripple of unease through the cabin as he approached Jordan. "Sir," the officer began, his tone curt, "we've been called to address a concern. Please gather your things and step off the plane with me." Jordan's brows furrowed. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice steady. "We need to confirm that you're legitimately in this seat," the officer replied. Ignoring the protests from nearby passengers, Jordan sat still for a moment before calmly unbuckling his seatbelt. If they wanted proof, they were about to get it. As Jordan rose from his seat, his briefcase in hand, he felt the weight of the stairs around him. The cabin was eerily silent except for the low hum of the plane's ventilation system. Passengers in first class craned their necks to watch, while those further back whispered among themselves, trying to piece together the scene unfolding at the front of the plane. Jordan looked at the officer, whose expression was a mix of impatience and discomfort. Beside him, the flight attendant fidgeted nervously, glancing between Jordan and the accuser across the aisle. The man's smug grin was a sharp reminder of why Jordan was being singled out. This isn't new, Jordan thought, his mind flashing back to moments in his life where he'd been unfairly judged. There was the time in college when he was pulled over in his own car, the officer doubting it could belong to him. And years later, as a rising star at a law firm, he was once asked if he was the new intern while waiting in a client's lobby. But this time was different. Jordan had built his career on challenging systemic bias, and now he was being forced to defend himself on a plane he had every right to be on. He looked down at the boarding pass still clutched in his hand. "You can't let this slide," he told himself. If he walked off the plane quietly, it would send the wrong message to the officer, the passengers, and especially the man who had started all this. With a steady breath, Jordan made his decision. He would confront the situation, not with anger, but with the truth that no one could dispute. As Jordan adjusted his tie, he turned to the officer. The words he was about to speak would leave everyone speechless. Jordan stopped, turned to face the officer and the entire cabin, and spoke firmly. "I'm Jordan Michaels, lead counsel for Skylux Airlines. The only reason I'm on this plane is because I helped this airline avoid a lawsuit that would have bankrupted it last year. Gasps echoed through the cabin. The officer froze, his hand lingering near his radio. The man across the aisle looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Jordan continued, his gaze locking with the man who had caused the incident. And as someone who helped build the policies that keep this airline running, let me tell you this: discrimination isn't just wrong, it's bad business. The murmurs grew louder as passengers began to voice their support. He's right, one woman said. This is ridiculous, another added. The officer stepped back, suddenly unsure of his authority. Mr. Michaels, I wasn't aware. Jordan raised a hand, silencing him. You shouldn't have to be aware. Your job is to investigate facts, not assumptions. So here are the facts. My ticket is valid. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And this man, he gestured to the accuser, owes me an apology. The accuser stammered, his confidence evaporating. Would he apologize or dig himself into an even deeper hole? The cabin remained tense as the weight of Jordan's words hung in the air. The officer, now visibly uncomfortable, stepped back, lowering his voice. Mr. Michaels, I apologize for the misunderstanding. There's no need for further action. Jordan's gaze didn't waver. The problem isn't just this moment. It's the mindset behind it. You shouldn't need my name or my title to treat me with basic respect. Passengers began murmuring their agreement, some even applauding quietly. One woman seated a few rows back stood up and addressed the officer. You need to think about why you even believe this accusation. This man was sitting quietly, not bothering anyone. The officer nodded, his face flushing. You're absolutely right. Ma'am, again, I'm sorry. Mr. Michaels. The flight attendant stepped in, their tones now overly apologetic. Mr. Michaels, can we get you something to drink or a meal on us? Please, let us make this right. Jordan waved off their offers. What I need is for this airline to do better. Start by reviewing how you train your staff and handle complaints. This could have ended much worse for me and for your reputation. Greg, the man who had caused the incident, was now staring at his hands, his earlier smugness replaced by shame. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I just thought. Jordan cut him off, his voice calm but sharp. You thought wrong. And that's the problem. You assumed, because of how I look, that I didn't belong here. That assumption didn't just insult me. It exposed your bias for everyone to see. The cabin erupted into applause, passengers voicing their support for Jordan. A middle-aged man seated in coach stood up and called out, You're absolutely right. This kind of thing needs to stop. As Jordan sat back down, the accuser slumped in his seat, avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. The officer quietly exited the plane, and the flight attendants quickly resumed their duties. Their energy visibly rattled. As Jordan leaned back in his seat, a flight attendant approached cautiously. Would her next words prove the airline had learned from this? Or was there still more to address? Jordan's one sentence had silenced the plane, but the lesson extended far beyond the cabin. Moments like these, where prejudice was met head-on with dignity and truth, were opportunities to spark real change. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Jordan reflected on the incident. The fight against prejudice isn't just about calling it out. It's about holding people accountable and demanding better systems. He stepped off the plane with his head held high, knowing that his actions might inspire someone else to stand their ground. The murmurs of passengers still lingered behind him, their conversations marked by a shared realization. Respect should never be conditional. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation like this? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and resilience.